The kitchen of the Connor household was a place where history lived in the layers of peeling floral wallpaper and the rhythmic, struggling hum of a refrigerator that had seen better decades. 3 weeks had passed since the world had tilted on its axis. 3 weeks since the laughter of Roseanne had been replaced by a heavy, echoing silence that no amount of ambient noise could truly fill. Dan Connor stood by the counter, staring down at a translucent plastic container that sat like a lonely monument to communal grief. He poked at the contents with a plastic spoon, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and mild culinary dread. Was that tuna casserole or potato salad? Dan asked, his voice gravelly and thick with the fatigue of a man who had forgotten what a full night of sleep felt like. He looked toward Darlene, who was leaning against the sink, her eyes fixed on a spot on the linoleum floor that had been worn smooth by years of foot traffic. Darlene did not look up. She simply shrugged, her shoulders rising and falling in a gesture of weary indifference. "No idea," she replied. "At this point, it is just mayonnaise. It is a mystery left behind by a neighbor whose name we have probably already forgotten. It has been 3 weeks since the celebration of life for Granny Rose. Why are people still giving us casseroles? And for that matter, why do people always bring heavy, starch-filled casseroles when someone dies? Is there some unwritten law that grief requires an excessive amount of cream of mushroom soup?" Becky, who had been quietly organizing a stack of mail at the kitchen table, looked up with a sad, knowing smile. "It is actually a practical gift, Darlene," she said softly. "When people are in deep pain, they do not want to cook. They do not want to stand over a stove and think about nutrition or meal prep. They just want to survive the next 10 minutes. A casserole is a way of saying I know you are hurting, and I do not want you to starve while you do it." "And when the casserole is finally gone," Darlene countered, her voice sharpening with that familiar edge of cynicism. "What if the person who passed away was the only one in the house who actually knew how to cook? Then what? Do we just stay in pain until we figure out how to fill ourselves up? I honestly feel bad that it is taking us so long to return all these ingredients and containers to their rightful owners. We have a graveyard of plastic tubs in the pantry." "That is true," Becky agreed, her gaze drifting back to the mail. "Other people die, and their neighbors get casseroles in neatly labeled plastic tubs. But for us, it feels like the world has stopped, yet life keeps demanding that we wash dishes. It is not as if the Grim Reaper is taking a coffee break while we walk around here, trying to remember how to breathe." Suddenly, the doorway was occupied by a figure that seemed to vibrate with a frantic, nervous energy. Jackie stepped into the kitchen, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Must we still talk about death?" she asked, her voice reaching a high, tremulous pitch. "Every time you mention it, it reminds me of my sister. It reminds me of the hole in the middle of this family that is never going to close." "Sleep, sweetheart," Dan said, reaching out to pat Jackie on the arm with a gentleness that only he could manage in the midst of his own sorrow. "Go lie down for a bit. I have everything under control. I will handle the mystery mayonnaise and the mountains of dishes." "Hey, thanks," Darlene said as Jackie retreated toward the living room. We probably should not have had that specific conversation where she could hear us. It was a bit much even for this house. "That is the reason why I am here," a sharp, brittle voice announced from the hallway. Grandma Bev shuffled into the room, her 92-year-old frame appearing surprisingly sturdy despite the weight of the moment. "I know that Roseanne would ask me to step in and play a role in this family. She would want me to keep things moving, to ensure that you all do not simply dissolve into a puddle of self-pity. No, it would kill her," Dan muttered under his breath, his eyes fixed on the floor. "But she is already dead." "Dan," Bev pointed out with a brutal efficiency that only she possessed. "So, let us begin. No mother should ever have to see her own children die. It is against the natural order of things. A cruel twist of fate that I am forced to endure." "Mama, you are 92, Darlene reminded her, her voice a mix of love and exasperation. "You are going to see all of us die. You are going to outlive the sun. And then, when there is nothing left but stardust, you will probably be turned off by a robot." The tension in the room was suddenly broken by the sound of the front door swinging open. A gust of fresh air rushed in. And with it came Gina. She stood in the doorway, her uniform dusty from travel, her eyes bright with the relief of being home. "Hey, guys," she called out. "Gina," DJ yelled, rushing from the other room to pull her into a tight embrace. "Hey, I am so glad you are here. I am so sorry that I missed the actual service. The airport in Afghanistan was under attack for a while," Gina said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Everything was locked down. It was a nightmare. Honestly, it felt like getting through security was slower than O'Hare on a holiday weekend." She set a heavy bag on the table, the contents rustling. "These are just fruits and more fruits," she explained, gesturing to the bag. "I noticed the kitchen was full of heavy cakes and fried things. If you do not eat well, your heart can attack you just like Granny Rose's heart attacked her. We need vitamins, not just comfort food." "Oh, I must take this," Jackie said, reappearing with a bundle of clothes clutched to her chest. "I just finished cleaning out Mama's dresser. I was going through the drawers and I found these. Do you remember how she always used to scream that she was not wearing shoes? How she hated the restriction of them? Well, here they are. Every single pair she ever owned. It feels wrong to just leave them there." She turned her attention to Dan, her eyes narrowing with concern. "Dan, Papa, you must sleep in your bed. I saw you this morning on the couch. Sleeping on the couch is bad for your back. And you are not a young man anymore. You need proper support. I was just watching television," Dan insisted, his eyes darting toward the blank screen in the living room. "It was not the end of the world. I just drifted off during a commercial. I read an article in the dermatologist office recently," Mark interrupted, looking up from a textbook he had spread out on the counter. "It said that it is actually very common for people to avoid sleeping in a bed where someone has recently died. It is a psychological response to trauma, a way of avoiding the cold reality of the loss." "Fascinating," Dan replied, his voice dripping with heavy sarcasm. "Truly groundbreaking stuff. Mark, beyond that, have you ever read something that someone actually wants to hear? Something that might make the day a little easier?" "No, usually not," Mark admitted with a small shrug. "No." Becky turned to Gina, changing the subject to something more grounded. "Gina, how long do they give you? How long before you have to go back to Afghanistan?" "Oh, they only give you a 5-day leave for the death of a direct family member." Gina sighed, her expression clouding. "It is a short window of time to process something this big. Aunt Darlene says that Granny Rose is going to come back as a murderer or a grasshopper," Mary said, her eyes wide with a child wonder. "She said she could be anywhere, watching us from the shadows. That is really sweet in a terrifying way," Becky noted, glancing at Darlene. "But I think Aunt Darlene should probably go get her yoga pants and a Bible. Maybe find a middle ground between reincarnation and reality. It is not so crazy." "Really?" Darlene defended herself, leaning back against the counter. "Reincarnation is a legitimate belief system. There are over 1 billion people on this planet who believe that we come back in different forms. It is not just me being weird. Well, you should probably make your reservation in the afterlife soon then," Dan joked darkly. "Because if 1 billion people are waiting in line to become grasshoppers, it is going to be crowded." "Reservation?" Jackie asked, looking genuinely confused. "Why would we need a reservation? We already have a cabana for the summer trip." Darlene took a deep breath, her expression shifting from cynical to serious. "Ben, can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, pulling him toward the quiet corner of the hallway. "I just got off the phone with a friend who works in the medical examiner office. The results of the autopsy came back." Dan followed them, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What is it?" he asked. "The autopsy found that it was not a simple heart attack," Darlene said, her voice barely a whisper. "Roseanne tested positive for opioids. High levels of them." "That is impossible," Dan whispered, the world around him suddenly feeling very cold and very thin. "We knew she had a problem a few months ago, but she was only 2 days out from her knee surgery. She told me she was only taking ibuprofen. She promised me she was staying clean. That must be wrong. Dan insisted, his voice cracking. There has to be a mistake in the lab. I wish it were, Darlene said, her eyes filling with tears that she refused to let fall. But the examiner thinks she took the pills right before bed. With her existing health problems and the weight issues, it was enough to stop her heart while she slept. She did not even know it was happening. I did not know, Dan stammered, leaning against the wall for support. Wait. What? Roseanne had an addiction that I did not see? That makes no sense. I fixed her knee. I checked all her pill bottles every night. I thought I was protecting her. Oh my God. Becky yelled from the kitchen. She had been rummaging through the back of a high cabinet. I found these pills in Mama's closet. They were hidden inside a pair of old boots. These are not even prescribed for her. The label says they were from Marcy Bellinger. Jackie moved toward the small plastic bottle, her hands shaking. That is the only thing I wanted from Mama's closet, she cried, looking at the evidence of her sister's secret struggle. I cannot believe how far she went with these pills. I cannot believe she felt she had to hide this from us. Maybe we should just tell the credit collectors that Roseanne died, Darlene suggested, her mind already racing toward the practical fallout of the tragedy. Remember how she used that excuse 5 times herself to get out of paying the bills when she was still alive? It would be the most Roseanne thing we could ever do. Yes. But I think we should really consider selling the house, Becky said, her voice small and fragile. Everything in here feels like it is haunted by things we did not say. Are we terrible for laughing right now? Mark asked, looking at the adults with a confused expression. We are talking about death and addiction. And yet we are making jokes about credit collectors. Well, I am tired of crying, Darlene admitted, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And laughing at things that are unfair and cruel is exactly what Roseanne taught us to do. It was her survival mechanism. I still cannot believe she is gone, but I know she would hate it if we were all sitting here in silence. You know what? Becky said, standing up with a sudden burst of resolve. I cannot deal with the talk of pills anymore. It is too much. I have to go finish my shift at the restaurant. We have a full house tonight, and they need the extra help. Okay. But we have to finish cleaning out the house and sorting through her things, Darlene said. We will do it on Friday night. We will just get it over with. I cannot. I have a date, Becky replied, her voice defiant. Okay. Fine. We will do it on Saturday night, Darlene conceded, her temper beginning to flare. I just told you that I have a date on Friday night, Becky repeated, her eyes flashing. Darlene, you cannot expect me to just stay vertical for another day without some kind of break. Look, maybe you can handle this cold and clinical approach, but I cannot. I already went through this once when Mark died. I spent months in a fog of grief, and I do not want to do it again. You are not going to just throw everything of Mama and Papa away as if it never mattered, okay? I have 2 children to think about, and I have a full-time job. I am doing the best I can. No, Darlene snapped. You are the official choice to take over the household responsibilities because you are the oldest. But you are acting like a child. You live here already. And you are becoming a terrible tyrant about the schedule. Are you just going to insult me and then walk out? Becky asked, grabbing her purse. You are right, Darlene said, reaching for her own coat. I am going to get my phone and find someone to take over my shift so I can stay here and do the work you are avoiding. I am going to do what is right for the family. You are too trusting, Becky. You think everything will just work itself out, but it won't. You might want to work on that. Hey, you and Becky must come together, Gina said, stepping between the 2 sisters. This is exactly what we do not need right now. What if one of you dies tomorrow and the last thing you ever did together was have a fight? Life is too short for this. Oh. Hey, Darlene replied, looking at Mark, who was watching them with wide eyes. Do you remember how you and Granny Rose used to fight a lot before she died? Over the smallest things? A little bit, Mark whispered. You know, families fight, Darlene said, sitting down next to him and softening her tone. It is part of the deal. But we know that we always love each other, even when we are screaming. And it is in all the letters that Granny Rose left for us. She made sure we knew. Did Granny Rose write a letter to everyone? Mark asked, hope flickering in his voice. Oh God. Maybe not everyone, Darlene admitted, realizing she might have overpromised. You are scaring me now, Mark said, pulling his jacket tighter. I am going to die tomorrow if you keep being so gloomy and mysterious. Later that afternoon, Darlene walked into the garage to find Dan standing by the side of his truck. He was holding a large paintbrush, and there was a bucket of black paint on the concrete floor. What are you doing? She asked, noticing the large, messy letters he was beginning to form on the vehicle. Rosen always wanted to do something like this, Dan explained without looking up. She wanted to make a statement, to let the town know where we stood. And I thought that with all the trouble we have had in the last few years, and the previous 40 years of unmentioned resentment that we just swept under the rug, this would be a good time to fulfill her dream. It is a tribute, in a way. When will it be dry? Darlene asked, squinting at the words. I wanted to use the truck to go pick up some things. And I wanted to watch television for a little while without worrying about getting paint on the upholstery. It takes 3 to 5 days to fully cure, Dan replied, dipping his brush back into the bucket. I have been thinking about what I said earlier, and I noticed that it was terrible and varied in its cruelty. I see that now, because I have to drive to work and face the people in this town. I am sorry that you lost her, Dan, his friend Chuck said, walking into the garage with a quiet, respectful tread. She was a force of nature. It is in the house. Chuck, Dan said, gesturing toward the kitchen. The loss is everywhere. I like it. In a strange way. It keeps her close. Is your sympathy for close friends only? Or are you handing it out to everyone today? No, Chuck replied, shaking his head. That sympathy is for the home. My hurt is deeper than that. Dan, I think it goes all the way to Zurich. It is a global ache. Papa, what is that? Darlene asked, pointing at the truck again as the message became clearer. What does it look like? Dan countered. It looks like a defense of a very long and bitter argument. She said, you cannot do that. You cannot drive around town with that painted on the side. I only took the magnet from the side of your truck because it was embarrassing. And now you have made it permanent. People are taking pictures anyway. Dan said, his voice hard. That is the point. They want to stare? Let them stare at the truth. Set it back. Darlene, let me have this one thing. Look, I know that you are angry, Darlene said, her voice softening. I know you want to lash out at the world. But that will not help bring her back. It helps me, Dan insisted, his hand tightening on the brush. Now I can both express my rage and drive my truck through the house if I feel like it. Do not do that, Chuck warned, pointing a finger at Dan. My friend did that once during a bad divorce, and he had so much trouble with the revocation of his license. The state does not take kindly to vehicular home entry. Thanks for the tip, Chuck, Dan said. Let us go. I need to get some air. The truck through the house thing. That is just a figure of speech, right? Mark asked, his voice trembling as he watched them leave. Papa, these are Enrique and Joey, Mark said a few minutes later, introducing 2 boys from his class who were standing awkwardly on the driveway. Hello, man, Dan said, nodding to the boys. Look, you guys can play here in the yard. I have things to do in the garage, but you do not have to leave. You are welcome here. No, Darlene said, stepping out onto the porch. They are leaving because I have work for Mark to do. They only came over to get a drink of water. I am sorry to hear about your wife, Mr. Connor, Enrique said, his voice sincere and small. Thank you, son, Dan replied, a momentary shadow crossing his face. People die. It is a part of life. What are you going to do? Have you seen a bit too much action in your young life? See you tomorrow, boys. And it is our police officer, Jackie noted as she walked past them, her eyes red from crying. All right. The law has arrived. I am in the garage. Buddy, Dan told Mark, heading back to his sanctuary of tools and sawdust. Okay, Mark said, following him. Can I ask you something? It is about school. Sure. If it is fast. Dan replied, picking up a wrench. Granny Rose and I talked about the field trip on Friday, and we never actually finished the conversation, Mark explained. There are 2 kids who want me to sit next to them on the bus, and she was going to help me figure out who to choose. Because whoever I sit next to, it means I like them as more than just a friend. It is a big commitment for a middle schooler. That does not sound like a fast conversation. Buddy, Dan said, setting the wrench down. Are you one of them? Boys. The ones I just saw? Yes. Enrique and Joey. Mark answered. Do you want to talk more about death? Because that seems to be the only other topic people are interested in today. I just have to make a decision. Mark insisted. It is important to my social standing. I have to be honest with you, buddy, Dan said, looking at the boy with a weary smile. There is a reason why your mother and Aunt Becky handle all these emotional things. They have the stamina for it. It is a measure of my deep love for you that I have already flown out of the room in my mind. I am currently mentally at a bowling alley 3 towns over. Grandpa Dan. Mark asked. Yes. Do you ever like a boy? In that way? No. Dan replied, his voice steady and without judgment. Does it bother you that I do? No. Dan said, reaching out to ruffle the boy hair. I have been waiting for you to tell me about it. I was just waiting for you to be ready. I am sorry it took so long. Mark whispered. Okay. Let it not happen again. Dan said, no more secrets between us. I hope everyone enjoys the movie tonight. I am going to stay here and have fun on this hard wooden chair, paying for the privilege of sitting at a plastic table that came from the home buffet. At least you do not have a wet backside when you sit on the couch. Jackie called out from the living room, her voice muffled as she continued to scrub the upholstery with a damp cloth. Oh, did I forget to tell you that your Aunt Jackie was washing the couch with a bucket of soapy water? Dan asked Darlene as she walked by. My apologies. You definitely could have told me that before I sat down. Darlene snapped, looking at the damp patch on her trousers. Yes, I could have done that, Dan admitted, a small spark of the old humor returning to his eyes. I am going to get more coffee. Does anyone else want a cup? I will go with you, Becky said, following him into the kitchen. Do not touch, Jackie screamed as they reached for the coffee pot. I have a very specific system in place. What exactly are you doing, Jackie? Becky asked, pulling her hand back. I am making life easier for everyone with the concept of the kitchen work triangle that I saw on a home improvement show on television, Jackie explained, her eyes wide and manic. The flow of labor should be from the refrigerator to the stove and then back to the refrigerator. It is the peak of efficiency. Therefore, the coffee maker, which needs milk from the fridge, coffee from a canister next to the stove, and water from the fridge, should be at the geometric heart of the triangle, which is exactly right here, in the middle of the counter where no one can reach it. And where exactly are we supposed to plug it in? Dan asked, looking at the lack of outlets in the geometric heart. Yes, I have thought of that, Jackie said, her hands moving rapidly. I am going down into the basement. I will install a hole through the kitchen hallway, and then install a decorative pillar. We can run a cable from the fridge area, through the hallway, down into the basement, back up through the middle of the kitchen table, and then install a new outlet. Bam! We are making coffee in the future. I think you have had quite enough coffee for one day. Jackie, Darlene said, walking in. You know what? Why don't you go home and get some actual sleep? I need you to be rested for the long break we are taking this weekend. No, Jackie yelled, her voice echoing. No, I am fine. I mean, I have the time now to do these things for you. I need to be useful. I just need to finish this one project. Yes, you have already done so much, Dan said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I mean, between your cleaning and your organizing, we can no longer sit on the couch or use the refrigerator without a map. I think that is a good start for any holiday. Suddenly, Darlene pulled a small bag from the back of the freezer. Oh, she said, her voice turning cold. Where did these come from? Yes. I found them in an ice pack in the back of the fridge, Jackie said, her frantic energy suddenly evaporating. Oh God. So Mama just hid pills everywhere? Becky asked, her voice trembling. Even in the freezer? Yes. I knew you would be angry, Jackie admitted, looking at her feet. I wanted to throw them away as soon as I found them. But I forgot where I had put the trash can in all the excitement. I mean, if something is outside the work triangle, it is essentially invisible to me. I mean, a knock at the door interrupted the heavy silence. Dan went to open it and found a middle-aged woman standing on the porch, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. Can I help you? Dan asked. I am Marcy Bellinger, she said, her voice small and shaky. Can I speak with Dan Connor? Please. I have this, Dan said, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. You have a lot of nerve showing up here. Marcy, please take that magnetic sign off your truck. The one talking about your business. No, Dan said, his voice a low growl. Everyone in this town has already seen it. You made your point. They all hate me. Marcy cried, her face crumpling. I cannot eat. I drink myself to sleep every night just to stop the shaking. I have to live with the weight of this for the rest of my life. Is that not enough for you? Is my suffering not enough? My wife is gone, Dan yelled, his grief finally boiling over. She is gone because of a secret she kept. And you were the one who helped her keep it. What do you think I am feeling? Nobody in this town can afford their medication anymore, Marcy shouted back, her voice gaining strength from desperation. The insurance companies have abandoned us. We all help each other. When Sally Benson needs Lipitor for her husband's cholesterol because they cannot afford the copay, they get a few pills from Maria Ramirez. They give her the anxiety medication she needs in return. Roseanne needed painkillers for her leg. She was in agony every day. I had some left over from my own surgery, so I gave them to her. I thought I was being a friend. So you are part of a neighborhood drug ring, Dan said, his voice dripping with disgust. Congratulations, Marcy. You are a regular kingpin of Lanford. You know what, Dan? You can judge me all you want, but Roseanne called me, Marcy said. She told me that her knee was not healing fast enough and that the pain was making it impossible for her to work. I was the only person she felt she could turn to without being judged. She said she needed those painkillers to get back to the restaurant because you were out of money and the bills were piling up. Do not try to put the blame for her death on me, Dan said, his face turning a deep shade of red. You gave her the pills. She took them. She died. In my book. That means you killed her. Papa. Stop, Darlene said, stepping out onto the porch and placing a hand on her father's shoulder. We just found another stash in the freezer. It is not just Marcy. Mama was getting painkillers from a lot of different people. She was a master of the secret. I would have never given them to her if I had known she had a problem. Marcy sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I know what it is like to have a problem with substances. I would have tried to help her. So, I am truly sorry. Darlene looked at the broken woman on the porch. Darlene, can you drive Marcy home? Dan asked quietly, his anger seemingly spent, replaced by a hollow ache. Yes, Darlene said. Come on. Marcy, are you okay? Dad, Becky asked after the car had pulled away. I do not know, Dan said, staring out at the darkening street. Who am I supposed to be angry at now? I thought Marcy Bellinger was a perfect choice for a villain until she showed up and destroyed that image by being sad and human and just as broken as we are. How are you holding up? I wish I had known, Becky whispered, a single tear rolling down her cheek. I wish she had felt she could tell me. It would not have changed anything. Baby, Dan said, pulling her into a side hug. She would have done what she was going to do. She never listened to a single person in her entire life when her mind was made up. Well, she should have, Becky said, because I still need her. I still want to be able to call her and ask her how I am supposed to do all this. How I am supposed to be a mother and a worker and a person without her. Your mother told me once that she gave you everything you needed to survive before you were 5 years old. Dan said, his voice nostalgic. I have no idea what that actually means. But she was convinced of it. Yes, I could never figure it out either, Becky said with a small, watery laugh. I think she probably just meant she stole a snack from the cupboard for me and called it a life lesson. Man, she was stubborn. You know, I could not even get her to close the Velcro on her shoes when she went out to get the paper in the morning. And half the time, it was the neighbor paper she was stealing. You know what? Dan said, a tired smile finally reaching his eyes. Damn, I am still going to owe Marcy for those pills. Aren't I? In some cosmic way. Your mother would be proud of you for saying that. Jackie said, walking back into the kitchen with a fresh bucket of soapy water. Oh, Dan said, looking at the counters. There is no room for any of the kitchen tools anymore. You have moved everything. These are not just kitchen supplies. Jackie muttered, returning to her frantic scrubbing. These are not utensils. They are memories. I tried to put them in the cabinet with the gelatin molds. But that made no damn sense at all. It is okay, Aunt Jackie, Becky said, reaching out to take the sponge from her hand. I just wanted to stand in for her, Jackie cried, her voice breaking. You know, I just wanted to stand in after Roseanne and give you all everything you need to be happy. But I am only looking for things that I need. I keep packing and repacking these boxes. Nothing belongs anywhere. I do not even know where I belong anymore. I do not want to go home to my empty apartment. I do not want to leave this house because I feel like if I leave, I am leaving her behind. It is okay, Becky said, holding her aunt close. It is okay, Aunt Jackie. You know, it is hard for all of us. And you are just exhausted. You need to go home and sleep. Okay. You can come back tomorrow morning and she will still be here in our hearts. She isn't going anywhere. Yes. But you all need help, Jackie insisted, though her eyes were already beginning to close. Oh, I will be fine, Dan said. You know that. And if you need me tonight, if the silence gets too loud, you call me. Okay. Every single time. I just want to be sure you are in order. It hurts, Jackie whispered, clutching her arm. I know it hurts, Jackie. It has hurt for a long time, Dan said. No. The literal corn starch from the pantry is holding my shoulders stiff, Jackie noted, looking down at her white dusted sweater. Yes. It hurts. It hurts physically. Yes. Okay, Jackie said, finally relenting. So, I think I should probably go home now. Yes. DJ took Grandma Bev home a while ago, Becky said. She is probably surprised that he managed the drive without a map. No. That was never really my experience with Bev, Dan joked. Hey, Junior. Come here. He called out to Mark. What is going on, Grandpa? Mark asked, walking into the room. Listen, my head was not fully in the game before. But now I am going to help you with your bus seat situation. Dan explained. It is important work. What is this? Mark asked, looking at the piece of paper Dan had started to draw on. We are going to compare the best qualities of the two boys you are considering as a seatmate for the field trip, Dan said. Joey and Enrique. We will fill in the blanks and see who comes out on top. Joey is mostly depressive and somewhat sarcastic, Mark said, thinking it over. I like him because he always wears black and he understands the darkness of the world. I see a pattern forming here, Dan noted, glancing at Darlene. Okay. Let us make the same list for Enrique. What has he got going for him? Enrique is sweet and funny. And he is a robot champion in the science club, Mark said. He is always making people laugh. Does his family have money? Dan asked, his practical side showing. I do not know, Mark replied. But they go on vacation every year and they always come back with deep tans. Florida people. I love it, Dan said, nodding. They are reliable. Thanks, Grandpa, Mark said, looking at the list. That really helped me clarify things. So, who will it be? Darlene asked, leaning over to look at the paper. I like Joey, Mark said firmly. There is something about the brooding nature that speaks to me. Joey? Becky asked, horrified. Are you crazy? Enrique is a hero. He builds robots. You do not leave a robot-building hero on the table when he is an option. I still like Joey, Mark insisted. What is going on in here? Harris asked, walking into the kitchen and looking at the gathering. Papa helped me choose a seat made for the field trip, Mark said. He chose the black and brooding one. Oh, a point for my team, Darlene cheered, raising a glass of water. The dark side wins again. Trust me, Mark, Darlene said, placing a hand on his shoulder. It is much faster and more efficient to just embrace the black and brooding lifestyle early. It saves a lot of time later in life. What is it like to grow up with a drama queen who thinks she is all that just because she was born first? Becky asked, looking at Darlene. Who even has hair like that anyway? Harris countered, pointing at her mother-wild curls. What is it like to have two older sisters who take all the air out of the room until you are practically undefeated by default? Dan asked Mark, pulling him into a side hug. It is a tough life, kid. Becky, did you hear something? Darlene asked, looking around the room with a confused expression. No, I did not hear a thing,